Greetings, YouTube! The Doctor is in. Dr. Urias Papers here, coming at you with another commentary on Dungeons and Dragons. And today we're going to be doing another video in our Weapon Mastery series. We are going to be talking about the Weapon Mastery Graze. Not one of my favorites. I have to say this is one of the weaker ones, but we are going to be talking about what Graze does. As you can see here, we're going to be talking about what weapons it goes with. We're going to be talking about what feats go along with it, and what classes could go along with it, and, you know, possibly some basis for some builds. So lots to go over, lots to talk about. Don't go anywhere and stay tuned. All right, before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a question or comment, and don't forget to hit that notification. Just as an aside, I want to plug a couple of my published works that I've got here. We've got two great adventures that are in the catalog of Dungeon Masters Guild. The links will be below, so check them out. The first one is The Vault of the Worm, Tensions in Baldur's Gate, by me, of course, Dr. Urias E. Papers. And this is one that's for 5 players, around 3rd level. And then we have The Painted Rock, A Quest to Prove Yourself, of course, by me, Dr. Urias E. Papers. And this is another one. This is optimized for 4th level players. Great adventures. They're both in the Dungeon Masters Guild catalog. You can find them, links below. All right, let's talk about Graze. It's our next one of these weapon masteries in the list. We already talked about Cleave, so I am going through these in order, and that is alphabetical order. So Graze says, if your attack roll with this weapon misses a creature, you can, meaning you have a choice, you can deal damage to that creature equal to the ability modifier you used to make the attack roll. This damage is the same type dealt by the weapon, and the damage can be increased only by increasing the ability modifier. So that means that if it is a magic weapon that's like a +1 weapon, you're not going to be increasing the damage past your ability modifier. So if it is a weapon that has Graze on it and it's based off of strength and you happen to have an 18 strength, if you miss with the weapon, you will do 4 points of damage. Now, one of the reasons I am not a big fan of this and I don't like this particular weapon mastery is it is not going to come up a lot. Very infrequently. Very infrequently. Chances are, and given the average armor class of most monsters in 5th edition and 5.5 2024-25 Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to be hitting more than 50% of the time. Probably about 55-60% of the time. Thus, this is really not going to be coming in effect, so you're kind of missing out on an automatic use of a weapon mastery if you choose a weapon with this weapon mastery. So something has to be better with these weapons, but we're going to talk about that. But first, I want to kind of give this a grade. So let's talk about the rating. Here's the rating scale. We are giving this one a grade of a D. So I would definitely avoid this one, or I would avoid weapons that do this, especially if there are weapons that are equivalent to it. So let's get that out of there. And now so we've talked about that. If you miss, then you do some damage equal to the ability modifier that is tied to the weapon. And if it does slashing damage, then that is also, if the weapon does slashing damage, then that's also going to do slashing damage. So let's talk about the weapons themselves that are used for this. So here we go. There it is. There's only 2 of them. It's Glaive and it's Greatsword. So the Glaive is heavy, it has reach, and it has the 2-handed property. So we could use feats that go along with each one of those. Heavy essentially means, let's get over here and we can define it. You have disadvantage on attack rolls with heavy weapons if it's a melee weapon and your strength score isn't at least 13. So that's pretty easy. You shouldn't be using this anyway if you have a strength less than a 13. It's got reach, so extra 5 feet, and it's two-handed, which means you got to have two hands. A great sword is also heavy, and so it has a strength requirement, and it requires two hands. So, and they both have graze. No other weapons have graze. Now, the glaive does 1d10 slashing damage, which on average is 5.5 slashing damage, and the great sword does 2d6 slashing damage, which on average is 7. Not too much, about a 1.5 difference between the two. Are there other weapons that are heavy, reach, and two-handed that do not have graze? Of course, there's the halberd. It's a cleave weapon. It does the same amount of damage. And you're not always going to get cleave. You won't always get that. The lance is 1d6 piercing. It is heavy, reach, two-handed, unless you're mounted. And it does topple. So there is that. So there are weapons in here that have reach, that are heavy and two-handed. And then the greatsword is heavy and two-handed. It does graze. The great axe is heavy and two-handed. It does cleave, so there's something equivalent to it. The lance also is heavy and two-handed. The maul is heavy and two-handed. So there are a lot of different options other than greatsword that, although they don't do 2d6 damage, there aren't any other ones that do 2d6 damage. You're only giving up a 1.5 of damage for an exchange of possibly getting a weapon mastery that is going to work every time. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the actual mastery itself. We talked about the weapons themselves. There's only two, the glaive and the greatsword. They've got certain properties on them, and then they've got the Graze weapon mastery. So let's talk about the possible feats if you really wanted to have somebody who used a glaive or a greatsword. What feats do we think would go well with that? So I've got my notes here. See, there it is, streaming and podcast notes. There are my notes. So we're going to be looking at these and looking at the chart here. So the first one, and these are pretty much going to be very similar to the ones that we outlined for the cleave weapon mastery. And because those weapons that use the cleave mastery were essentially almost the same as the weapons that we're going to be using with this Graze mastery, except the difference is Graze versus cleave. Okay, so the first one is Charger. So here's Charger, and we get a bump to our ability score or our dex. When we take a dash action, your speed is increased by 10 feet for that action. Unless you've got levels in something that gives you a bonus dash, I wouldn't bother with this. And then we've got the charge attack. If you move at least 10 feet in a straight line, you're going to do some extra damage. So that's a good thing. Next one is Great Weapon Master. And here it is right here, Great Weapon Master. So we get a bump to strength. It has heavy weapon mastery. So if it's got the heavy property, which we're talking about, as part of the attack action, you can cause the weapon to deal extra damage. The extra damage equals your proficiency bonus. So that happens every time. That's a feat. And then you've got Hue. So after you crit or reduce something to 0, you can make an attack with the same weapon as a bonus action. Hopefully you've got a bonus action left. Then we've got Pole Arm Mastery. This one will only be useful with the glaive. Remember, we're talking about glaive, or we're talking about the greatsword. So this one will not work with the greatsword because this one has very specific requirements. So it works with a quarterstaff, a spear, or a weapon that has heavy and reach. Greatsword doesn't have reach. So you can take a bonus action to make a melee attack with the opposite end. It's a D4. Or you could do the reactive strike. So while you're wielding this, you can take a reaction to make a melee attack against a creature that enters your reach. And remember, you have reach, which gives you an extra 5 feet. And then we have Savage Attacker. And this one's good with both of them. You've trained to deal particularly damaging strikes once per turn when you hit a target with a weapon. You can roll the damage dice twice and use either result against the target. That's not re-roll, that's roll it twice. The previous Savage Attacker allowed a re-roll. There's the word re-roll. This is not a re-roll anymore, so rolling twice is not as good as a re-roll. Statistically, maybe, but if you roll a low roll and then you re-roll, you're probably not going to get a low roll. So, but on average, you're probably not going to get a low roll if you roll twice. This is an Origin Feat. It's a freebie, so you could take this one and another thing, by the way. Then we've got Sentinel, and this one gives you a bump to your strength or dex, and then immediately after a creature within 5 feet of you takes the disengage action or hits a target other than you can make an attack as an opportunity attack. There you go. And you've got Halt. When you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, the creature's speed becomes 0. So you make the opportunity attack with Guardian, and that opportunity attack causes them to halt. Okay, then we have Slasher, because these are slashing weapons. So we get a bump to our strength or our dex. Once per turn, we hit a creature with an attack that deals slashing damage. You can reduce the speed by 10 feet till the start of your next turn. We have an enhanced critical. When you score a critical hit that deals slashing damage to a creature, it has disadvantage on attack rolls until your next turn. None of this stuff is tied to the actual weapon mastery, Graze. All of this stuff is essentially tied to the weapon itself, which is the glaive or the greatsword. And then finally, we've got the Strike of the Giants. I actually like this one quite a bit. It gives you a bunch of different choices that you can do. Like the Fire Strike, the target takes an extra D10. And you can use this feat a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, and you regain all expended uses on a long rest. So if your proficiency bonus is +3, you could do Fire Strike 3 times before you have to take a long rest. Some of these are better than other ones. Hill Strike can knock things prone. Frost Strike reduces their speed, things like that. So this is a pretty cool feat. It's from Big B's Glory of Giants. All right, so let's talk about the last thing, which is classes. And there's 3 obvious classes for this. The first one is the Barbarian. And the reason for these is because these classes all get access to the weapon mastery. So here it is, level 1 weapon mastery. Your training with weapons allows you to use the mastery property of 2 kinds of simple or martial melee weapons of your choice. Whenever you finish a long rest, you can practice drills and change one of those weapons. Then if you get more as you go up in level. So that's one. And then the next one obviously is the fighter, who gets, and all 3 of the classes I'm going to talk about here all get access to these particular weapons. So down here is the weapon mastery. So fighters get training in 3 kinds of weapon masteries, and then they can switch them around. And then they get more as they go up in levels. And the last class that we're going to talk about here is, of course, the Paladin, who also has access to weapon masteries. And here it is right here. Allows you to use the mastery properties of 2 kinds of weapons of your choice. And when you finish a long rest, you can exchange those. Now, you can't get really more. And then there's fighting styles that kind of go along with this, kind of not. Now, these are heavy weapons. So, maybe I would take something like heavy weapon mastery. The fighter gets a lot of these things. I think they've got them. There's a list of them, and they're in the feat section. So we got fighting style, and that is in the feat section. So let's go back to the feat section here. Let's go all the way back up to the top. And they don't really kind of list them here. They're all kind of mixed in. If you really want a decent list, the actual player's handbook has a list of them here. And here they are right here. So archery, blind fighting, defense, duelist. Great weapon fighting is one of these. So when you roll damage for an attack you make with a melee weapon you're holding in 2 hands, you can treat a 1 or a 2 as a 3. That's a good one, and that's pretty much it. This used to be crits on a higher level, but that's pretty much the one that I would use. So all in all, this is not my favorite weapon mastery. It's probably the weakest out of all of them. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 different masteries. This is probably the weakest one out of all of them. And it's not always going to activate because you're probably going to be hitting more than you're going to be missing. And it's not a lot of damage. It's very inconsequential. It's 3 or 4, maybe 5 points of damage at the most. That's it. And it's just not going to come up that often. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think it's great. Cleave is just a little bit above that because it's another one that's not going to come up all the time. If you're fighting something solo, then Cleave is worthless. And Graze, as long as you're hitting, Graze is worthless as well. So, all right, that is the video I have for everybody. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I will catch everybody